apart from circumstances where you can only fit in one cubicle, and you know, those occur in all sorts of places, I just don't see the requirement for this at all. It seems to be driven by a kind of, you know, political correctness on steroids. And
yeah, I don't think men want. Well, I know men don't want it. I think that's you know, not in the same way that I could argue women don't want it because maybe an increased risk of harassment, etc. I think men just don't like the idea.
I think it's hygiene as much as anything else. I don't think we should get particularly hung up on harassment, which, you know, I'm sure in certain circumstances can and does happen, but you know, let's not exaggerate that necessarily.
Yeah.
But I think most of us just feel, quite frankly, if you've ever shared a home with a man, that there is
excuse me, it's not always just a man.
You know, people have big rows over these things in their domestic settings. They don't necessarily want them when they're out and about.
I am inclined to agree with you, of course. Right, so I want to settle this once and for all, though, and ask, should we keep gender-neutral toilets? Well, joining me to debate this is my guest, obviously Jo-Anne Nadler, there, you just heard, and Sam Dowler. So, Sam, thank you very much. I believe you might have just heard what Jo-Anne has just said there. Hopefully you have. Firstly, I hope you're well. I hope you're keeping well, my good man. It's been a while since we've last met. But, look, come on, you can't be pro-gender-neutral toilets. Surely, Sam?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, toilets are gross anyway, and you will know this, Patrick, that men's toilets are even more gross, especially when you're out and about. So, for that reason, I mean, especially I agree with Jo-Anne when she's talking about, you know, toilets at home. But I think maybe with a gender-neutral toilet, you get sort of, I think men would maybe check themselves a bit more, like not pee on the seats or have a look and, you know, and check, and also no gross urinals either. So I'm for gender-neutral toilets because I think, you know, it's a case of going in, you know, doing your stuff and leaving. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, everybody's poo smells gross. So at the end of the day, whether you're a boy or a girl. So I think at the end of the day, like with you have there at GBNews, I've been to the toilets there before, and they are fine.
Look, that is the point, though, Sam, isn't it? Which is that I think you don't necessarily want to be in that environment where you are in that. And I know that Jo-Anne touched a bit earlier about the sexual harassment element of it and not wanting to overplay that. But it is a point, Sam. You know, especially if we're talking about, say, a nightclub, for example, you know, and people, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, everyone's had a few drinks and potentially something else as well. Would you really feel comfortable there as an 18-year-old girl, you know, sharing a bathroom with a load of men? That doesn't sit right with me, Sam.
I do understand where you're coming from, of course. I've been to a lot of gay clubs and they have gender-neutral toilets because obviously you don't have, you know, great swathes of drunk straight men there. So, I mean, that sort of element is taken away. And there's sort of like a camaraderie of everybody like meeting in the toilets and washing your hands together and having a good laugh, etc. So in those scenarios, I think it's fine. But I do agree, like, as what you were saying, like, you know, a boozed up older gentleman, you know, like, looking like I wouldn't want it for my nieces, and I wouldn't want my mum to be in a place where that sort of thing would happen. So I think in some places it's fine, but others maybe not as much.
Yeah, John, is this a move? This quotes unquote push towards a gender-neutral toilet society, as it were, that's appeasing less than a fraction of a percent of the population at the expense of 100%.
I think you make a very, very important point, actually. I think, you know, we're largely looking to kind of overturn what is the sort of majoritarian consensus on an issue like this. There's, you know, who is pushing for it? There is no particular desire or campaign in favour of it, I would suggest. And I also think in some ways it's quite discriminatory against elderly people who I'm sure if you inquired, you'd find a vast proportion of older people would feel quite uncomfortable about this, to the point quite possibly of not using a gender-neutral toilet. So, you know, I think we really have to wonder what's going on here, and is it a push towards all sorts of other things? I mean, throughout most of my lifetime, there's been a real emphasis, for instance, within the NHS to campaign in favour of having women-only wards and men-only wards.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not quite sure where we've got to with that campaign because it was seen as being very expensive to implement. But that was seen as the civilised thing to do. And if that's a civilised thing to do within the NHS, why are we now having this push, you know, across the wider culture?